I vividly remember what it was like to move from being on campus to working a full-time job at a hospital. I'd had all these great expectations of how I'd get this good time with the Lord before I went to work. I'd develop relationships with my coworkers. I would be part of a small group at the local church and develop great community. They were all good things and really what my life had looked like on campus. But then the reality of working hit me and I was exhausted. I found myself so weary at the end of every day. My commute took longer than I anticipated, and work just used up every ounce of energy I had in my brain. So at the end of the day, I found that I had no energy to initiate toward people, either coworkers or people in my new small group. I was pretty discouraged with how in the mornings I would try to spend time with the Lord and would either find myself distracted by anxious thoughts for the workday or falling asleep if I'd even made it out of bed at all. The Lord met me in some really sweet ways during those first 8 months of working. He taught me about the new rhythms of this life in this season, that sometimes I wouldn't have the energy or the time or space to have these great long quiet times with him, but that I could meet with him throughout the day, that on the bus I could pull out a verse and be thinking about it, that I could pray as I entered into a meeting and ask, Lord, I need your wisdom for this conversation. That relationships with coworkers were just going to take a lot longer than I had anticipated. And even developing fellowship and community with believers, it wasn't as quick as it had been in college. The Lord taught me so much during that slower rhythm of life in those 8 months. But I have to say, I was pretty excited after a year of working when my energy started to return and I realized, okay, I can kind of reinstitute some of my old practices and my rhythms. But the Lord met me in those slower times. So while that was happening at home, at work, my life was picking up and I was learning very different things about time and energy. My boss, who I loved working for, he had been promoted about 2 weeks after I was hired. So he went from having one full-time job to the equivalent of 3. Suddenly, every moment at work mattered. And I got a front row seat of seeing how he managed his time. And what was even better was he was a believer. He'd been walking with Jesus for more than 40 years. And so I got to learn what it looked like to be a disciple of Jesus in the midst of a really fast-paced, high-pressure work environment. I learned from him very practical time management skills. Things like, if you can do it today, why put it off to tomorrow? Or if it takes less than 2 minutes, let's just do it right now. Those might seem like small little adages, but they were radically different than how I had lived my life on campus, where it was more of, if I can put it off to tomorrow, why do it today? Or if it takes less than 2 minutes, I'll do it later. He taught me about the value of doing something well and doing it right away. I'm so thankful for those lessons that I learned and how, as I engaged in those practices, it gave me favor and influence within the department that I worked in. But more than that, I learned about how he managed his time as a disciple of Jesus in the midst of working. He had discovered the value of praying with other believers, and so he met at 7 a.m. on Tuesday mornings with other physicians in our hospital. And then on Thursdays, he invited me to join him and other academic and medical professionals from our church to pray. We prayed from 12:15 to 12:45. That was a precious time of the day for him that he could have used to meet with faculty members or clinicians, that he could have used to catch up on email, or even just have a quiet moment to himself to eat his lunch. But instead, he chose to use it to meet with other believers and to pray. I learned about the cost of that to him, and yet that he saw it as a worthy investment of his time. The second thing I learned was how to view our time with the company. On Tuesdays, he would read the Bible with people who didn't know Jesus during his lunch break, so 12:15 to 12:45 again. It was so neat. He invited neuroscientists from his lab from all over the world to read the Bible with him, and I got to be part of those discussions, and it was really fun. But one day in particular, we were having a really robust conversation, and I was pumped about where we were going. But then all of a sudden, it hit 12:45, and my boss said, okay, that's all the time that we've got today. I look forward to the conversation next week. We walked out, and I asked him, how could you end the conversation right then? We were just getting to some really good things. And he pointed out to me a principle that he had learned from Jesus and the disciples. The disciples had asked Jesus, should we pay taxes? Like, you are our new authority and we see you as higher than Caesar's. Basically, like, do we still need to pay taxes? But Jesus had them pull out a coin and asked them, whose inscription's on this coin? They looked at it and they said, Caesar. And then Jesus said, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. And so from my boss's perspective, our company, our organization paid for the hours that we were supposed to be at work. And they were the name that was inscribed on our paycheck, on our badges. And so that we needed to give to the organization what was theirs. So for the hours that we were scheduled to work, we needed to work. We needed to honor God by working for them and doing it well and wholeheartedly. But for the hours that were our own, so lunch hours, before work, after work, we need to have open hands, be willing to do whatever the Lord asked of us. So that principle carried over in so many ways for me of giving to the organization what they deserved, but giving to God what was His. And then thirdly, one of the principles I learned about time from my boss was from Colossians 3. It says, bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye servants as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. I saw how my boss lived that out with his bosses. And though I in no way felt like a slave, I needed to be responsive to anything he asked of me. Not only him, but his authorities and the organization as a whole. Not just to do that so that I could earn favor, so that I could please him, so that I could in any way self-promote or move up the corporate ladder, but that the goal of it was that I would do it out of fear of the Lord. And honestly, that was really convicting for me because it was really easy to work diligently when my boss was around or when I knew that somebody would be looking closely at my work. But on a day-to-day basis, when I was by myself, it was easy to be distracted and it was easy to not work wholeheartedly. But then the next verse says, work wholeheartedly as though working for the Lord and not for men. And I kept that up on my desk so that I would remember my job here. Honestly, it's not for my boss and it's not for the organization, but I want to work wholeheartedly and honor the Lord. And I was amazed that as I did that and as I watched my boss do that, we continually got invited into areas of influence and favor within our organization. So it's my prayer for you that as you are moving into this new season of away from campus and into a workplace, that one, you would experience the grace that I did in a new rhythm of life, that you would hold tightly to convictions but loosely to practices, that you would experience the things that are worth the cost. So meeting with other believers, it might mean that you have to leave something undone or leave an hour unprotected, but it is worth it. That you would also honor the place that God has put you. You would give to your organization what is theirs. But above all, that you would do it all in fear of the Lord, trusting Him and honoring Him in all that you do.